Hey guys, so for the first part of this week's lecture, I want to talk about what many of you probably hear about on a daily basis, or at least have heard about it several times in the last 10 years, and that is fake news. Now, we all know Donald Trump loved to talk about fake news, how it hurt him, how it hurt America, and really it did hurt America in a sense. It hurt the integrity of a lot of journalists and the idea that the free press is trying to help the citizen. Now, whether it was really hurting him or not, that's a different story and kind of where you fall on your political spectrum, but we're not going to get into that. But I am going to talk about just the idea of what fake news is and how you can go about being more media literate so that you don't fall into the category of people that fall for fake news. So let's dive into it a little bit. Fake news is not something that Donald Trump invented. It's not something that has come with the onset of the internet. It is something that has been happening throughout history. If you think back to ancient Greece, the theorists and idealists, Plato was like, hey guys, I think writing down your thoughts is actually detrimental because that way people can read them and then they can copy them and they can decide on their own how that's interpreted and then go out and spread their interpretation instead of what you wrote down. And so he thought that just by telling people in person what you thought was a lot better than writing it down. Then you have what, we all know that the church, no matter what religion you are, has always had a power throughout history. And one of those powers is that they controlled what was being printed on the printing presses because they wanted the Bible and the church's documents to be printed. Excuse me. And so in that way, it wasn't that they were necessarily spreading fake news, but they had the power to discriminate against news outside of the church and say it was fake. Along the same lines, those that were rich or privileged in society had more access to books. Therefore, they had more access to knowledge outside of the working man. They had access to the newspapers, and not just things that you could read, but also to people in our society that knew more about what was going on in politics around the world. And so from there, they could spread what they wanted, and those below would only get what they wanted to hear. So fake news. You also have what was called broadsheets. These were tidbits or newspaper clippings that were usually posted in pubs or in public areas for people to read. But as mentioned before, not everyone knew how to read or had access to learn how to read. And so therefore they would lean on those that had some kind of literacy and understanding, and they would read what they understood and then spread it to the masses. So therefore, another way of fake news because people aren't able to get the information for themselves. Then we go into what is called the Spanish War, and the newspapers that were depicting it. Basically, what happened was the Spanish-American War. Joseph Pulitzer and William Hearst, they were the two big newspaper rivals at that time, published false articles about a plot to sink a ship, increasing tensions between Spain and the United States, which eventually led to the war in 1898. This also eventually led to YOLO journalism because the two papers would start posting salacious things in their paper to one-up each other. They weren't necessarily wrong, but they weren't necessarily the whole truth. Then you go into, we get radio, and you would have radio ads, and then we had the debacle with War of the Worlds being played or being read over the airwaves, and people thought the world was ending. Fake news. We all know about tabloids, how there is somewhat of a truth to what the new celebrity gossip is, but how some of it is not true. Hillary Clinton is not a lizard in the sky. Now we have television news, and it's not so much that all television news is fake, but that we have very biased television news. So you have CNN, you have Fox News, you have MSNBC, and then everything in between, and they always just have an opinion. And so from there, people say one or the other is fake news. You have your silo that we've talked about in social media, your echo chamber, where all you hear is the things that you think are correct because of the algorithm, and then deep fake videos. We're going to get into that a little bit more here in a second. So as you can see, fake news is not new. It has happened throughout the history of media, and it's just part of what the media is, and we have to be media literate people to overcome that. And I don't say that to say that the media is fake, but that there's just always going to be someone trying to spread something fake to start something. I like to say, the TikTok that's like, am I the drama? No, am I? I think that's kind of where that goes. So we've all seen this on our social media lately. And whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, I think it's a little of both. We've talked a little bit about this in class. There is a shift in how we are seeing our echo chambers and false information getting spread changing. And I think this is important, but also, even if we have this, we still have to be media literate, because the algorithm, the AI, they're not always going to catch the right thing, right? How many, have you seen of these stories that it was actually true, but it had like one key word and it was like, no, this is wrong. Or vice versa, like it let it through, but it was absolutely not correct. And so you still have to be up on what's going on and news sources to really combat this. So when we talk about fake news and our digital ecosystem, there's some things that we need to talk about and how we play into it. One of them is the fragmented and personalized media consumption. We're not all sitting down to watch the 10 o'clock news anymore. We're not reading the morning paper. We're all getting our news from different places and that are very specialized to us. And that's okay to an extent, but it's also making it very hard to catch fake news, because we're not all getting it from the same source anymore, which is good and bad, right? Because we're not all being spoon-fed the same things, but we're also all not getting the same message that is important or truthful. We're getting some tidbits here, some tidbits there, making up our own. We're also a lot more active participants in the news process now. We've talked about that in class. We're no longer just reading it and maybe writing a letter to the editor. We're on Twitter. We're connecting with people. We're seeing people chatting. We're calling in, all of these things. We're commenting on Facebook and Instagram. We are active participants in it. We're also active participants in the fact that we are citizen journalists. You no longer have to wait to see video on the news. You can record what's going on in the world and put it on social media, put it on YouTube, and be a journalist in the sense that you're showing what's going on. It's not so much that you have to wait for someone who's classically trained to do all these things. We also have access to information and sources that we didn't always have. I'm a real big influencer on trying to get people to go out and read global journalism, global institutions, and read news around the world, because when you are just focused on what's going on in the US, you miss a lot of things. And I think a lot of people don't understand that when you go to the South China Morning Post or the Australian Post or the Russian Times or BBC, they have US oriented pages, but they also have so much information about what's going on in the world and how that affects everyone. But along with access to all this information, we have access to fake news. We have so much information that we'll never be able to get through all of it. And I know that you've heard this in all your classes. I know this is nothing new, but we really want to teach you how to be media literate and not fall for these things. Because if we can do that, then you can go out and be a better journalist and change the way things are going. We talked about aggregation and news formats, how it is specifically formatted to you when you think about TikTok. Whether you get your news from TikTok or not, you're going to find out things from there, and it's so distinctly, your page for you is so much for you that it's almost creepy, right? And so this aggregation is just feeding into it, and you'll watch that video from the Kind Project, where they're like, this is your distribution, and you want it's on the Dropbox and Blackboard, and you'll find that it's probably what yours is too. If you lean right, you're gonna have more right-leaning friends echoing what you think, or left, or if you're in the middle, you might see a little bit of both, and that's probably where you should be. And there's nothing wrong with being yes, that's what I believe, and being pumped up about that. But you also need to be aware that there are other thoughts out there, and not that they're right or you're wrong or you're right and they're wrong, but you need to consider all of the different aspects of what's going on and make your own opinion. There's also what's called the diminished institutional power. Basically, mainstream media no longer holds the reins to set the agenda. We talked about that last week, how they said what we should talk about, and they no longer do that. We can set the agenda as citizen journalists. We can set the agenda by looking up our own news stories. Somebody in class talked about how they love their Google News update every morning because it's aggregated just to them. And so while all those are great, in a way, things are still being set for us through an aggregation or an AI, but we have the power to break out of that. With everything that's going on, you also have people that when you think about diminished news power and the new forms of news media, objectivity is kind of in the middle, which is kind of funny because objectivity should be in the middle. But independent and powerful news sources, people on YouTube that are strictly dedicated to talking about news. I talk about Philip DeFranco. They're on one end, and then you have, Hannity on the other, which gives Hannity is somewhat of an opinion, but it gives you an idea, or, the Today Show or Brian Williams or whoever on the institutional power, the main sources who we know. And it's not that one is super objective and one isn't. They both will have their own bias. And that's where objectivity is hard to find, because no one can really be totally objective, right? You're going to always have your own opinion, but as journalists and in this college, you should learn how to best represent both sides. But honestly, people are going to say, well, you put this quote first, or you led with this, or you didn't spend as much time on this person and their topic. And so there's always going to be somebody that's nitpicking it, and objectivity can never be 100% reached. But finding something that is as objective as it can be is the key to being media literate, key to being a good journalist. I like to say that I think NPR, BBC, AP, Rutgers, they're all very, objective. They may lean slightly right or left depending on what the topic is, but they usually do stay pretty in the middle. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. And then last but not least, we should all be aware of trolls, clickbait, and deepfakes. So deepfakes are the videos where they're making, famous people, public figures say things that they didn't necessarily say, because AI is just amazing now. There's also just trolls and people just wanting to cause chaos. And then, of course, clickbait, and the idea that headlines will catch people's eye and they'll be like, oh, I read the headline, I know what they're talking about. We need to be aware that you need to read the whole thing and then go out and do your research. Excuse me. So I want to talk a little bit about the two differences between this. You hear these two terms intertwined a lot or interchanged, and they're very different. Fake news is false stories that appear to be news spread on the internet or using other media, usually created to influence political views or as a joke, whereas propaganda is information or ideas that are spread by an organized group or government to influence people's opinions, especially by not giving all the facts or by secretly emphasizing only one way or leaking the facts. So think about it as fake news is like The Onion. They're really just making fun of it, SNL, that kind of thing. And then there's propaganda when you think about the different wars that we fought and, or cults or whatever comes to mind for that. They are trying to spread a certain opinion and not give you all the facts. They want you to come in and be like overwhelmed with it. And so there is a distinct difference, right? Fake news could be the Tonight Show, whereas propaganda is, a communist country telling you that their way is the only way, those kinds of things. And so I wanted to make that there's a very distinct difference between them and that they shouldn't be used interchangeably. So here's a little bit of fake news statistics. We've talked a little bit about this last week with the onset of social media and how it's, basically our digital ecosystem. But 34% of Americans trust news on social media. 18% of Americans consider the media an enemy of the people, which is very sad. The media is not out to get people. They're not trying to be propaganda generators. They're really just trying to tell you what's going on. Now, I'm not saying that CNN or Fox News or whatever doesn't have an agenda, because sometimes they do, right? They do have opinion television shows and places where they have people come on and talk. But if you look at really unbiased media, they aren't the enemy. They are the fourth estate. They are the watchdog of the government. They're trying to let the people of America and the world know what is going on and be able to make their own opinion. 52% of Americans think online news websites report fake news. 31% of people share fake news on social media without checking. We've probably all done it without thinking about it. That's where that echo chamber comes in. And then 49% of people later found out that what they share was fake news. Now, do you go and correct yourself when you do that, or do you not? That's where media literate people come in. And I hope that you would go out and correct what you shared and say, this is actually what I found out. I'm so sorry. Here's what you should know. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So when you think about social media and the pathway to news, we talked about this a little bit last week, so I won't spend too much on it. 71% of US adults use Facebook, and 52% of them get their news. And so you can see how that goes to each one: Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, TikTok. This is I would expect YouTube to be a lot bigger. It's not, but this also could change because this was in 2019. We saw a little bit of a difference in what we saw from the 2020 statistics, but similarly, I just liked how this graphic showed you what's going on. All right, so this is what I was talking about with the objectivity and being unbiased. So when you think about media outlets and who is the most unbiased and who's going to give you both sides of a story to tell you what's going on and let you make up your own opinion about it, this is a good chart to look at. It's constantly updated. You can find it on Google. It's the media bias chart. I probably should update it. This one's from 2020, but it stays pretty much the same. But if you'll look in the middle here, where it says neutral, AP and Rutgers are right here. The Denver Post is pretty there in the middle. The Houston Chronicle, you have PBS, Bloomberg, and so you can see CBS, ABC, they're in the middle, they're neutral. Then you have NPR, it kind of skews a little to the left, depending on what they're talking about. You have the Wall Street Journal, it skews a little to the right. And that's going to happen. Sometimes it's where they're located in the country. It depends on the topic, all sorts of different things. But this gives you an idea of who you can kind of trust to give you both sides. Now you'll see like CNN is over here, and it's more to the left, and then you have Fox, which is way over here as well. And then there are ones that go even further, right? And so you just need to be aware of what you're watching, what you're reading, and if they're reliable or not. And this is a great way to kind of check that. On the other side is the same. It tells you who's in the center, who's on the right, and the most accurate that they are. Another thing that I like to look at is, so if you play any kind of fantasy game or mythical quest game, there's always like the, greater good versus the terrible bad, and so this is kind of the same way. It's like, where is it on the chart? So traditional journalism has an ethical intent and is accurate, and I put the Associated Press there. And then you have advocacy journalism, which is sometimes accurate, but also can have a manipulative intent to it. And I put Philip DeFranco there because, I mean, he is paid by ads, right? And he does do his own research, or his team does. Then you have what's called ethical intent, but it's false. And I put like the Today Show or the Colbert Report, that, they have, this ethical intent to bring awareness, but sometimes what they say is false because they want it to be funny. They want it to create an audience, they want commentary. And then you have what is false and manipulative, and I put the Onion because usually whatever they put out is just completely wrong. So that gives you an idea too of kind of where all of those good and bads can be and what their intent is. We also have what's called the hostile media phenomenon, and this relates a lot to fake news as well. And what it is that it's a person or a group of people. It's been well documented on several occasions that news coverage about an issue creates strong feelings within a person. And the more partisan that person is, or the more divided they are about a topic, like they're far right or far left, the more likely they are to claim that the media coverage of that topic is hostile to their point of view. So, if you were to say that, the media is all about getting a vaccine and masking up, and you believe that that's taking away your freedom, you're going to be very hostile against that opinion. The same goes with, any kind of really political idea. That's just a big topic right now. And so, but on the other hand, if you watch like a news outlet that says, oh, they're taking away, our freedom and you shouldn't mask up, this is all some kind of conspiracy, then, and you think that you should believe in the science, then you're going to feel very hostile towards that media. And so I like this meme playing on Zoolander where it's like, bias network news is so hot right now. It's so hot. And so it's just funny. Just know that the more divided you are, and the more you lean towards one opinion or the other, the more hostile you're going to be towards the media when it goes against what you think. And there's nothing wrong with that. What makes it wrong is when you don't go out and do your research to try and help explain the other side. Just continually posting things or looking at things that support your opinion and not the other doesn't widen your echo chamber. We talked a little bit about this last week too, but when you think about where the news comes from, you need to remember that the news is owned by 8 companies. And this is constantly changing too because people are buying up different companies. But this is most of the media in the country, and this is who owns it. So no matter if CBS or ABC or NBC, they all have their own news stations, but they're all going to be pretty much releasing the same kind of stuff because they're all linked in some way. It's just how it is. Money talks, right? So how do I become media literate? How do I spot fake news, and how do I become better at, helping others spot it? Well, one of those things is consider your source. You can click on a source and you can read it, but always investigate the site. Go to that bias report, see who owns it, see who their sources are. Read beyond just the headline. Do not trust what a headline says. More than likely, it's going to be clickbait. When you read inside the headline, that's where you're going to find the information you need to make an unbiased opinion. Check who the author is. You're going to know who credible sources are. You're going to kind of learn who uncredible sources are. And sometimes it'll depend on what side you lean on. But the author can really tell you if it's trustworthy or not. And that's kind of the source too, right? Who's supporting those sources? Is it your, grandmother who's very conservative, who only believes one way? Is she the one posting it? Is it the opposite, and it's your cousin who is the freest person in the world, who's very liberal, posting it? See who's supporting it, and kind of base that off too, and kind of say, well, maybe there's a better source in the middle somewhere, and always share that with them too. You don't have to be mean about it. Just be like, well, I found this one that kind of supports both sides. What do you think about it? Check the date. Reposting of old news happens so much, and a lot of it, if something similar happens, they're going to repost it because it becomes relevant, or they think that it'll help spread fake news. A lot of it is always like if there's a hurricane down in the coast, you'll see like the fake news where there's sharks in the streets or the alligators or whatnot, and sometimes it's just reposted material, and most of the time that's fake material that was posted to begin with. Also, look, is it a joke? Fake news is supposed to be a joke, right? It's supposed to be like SNL, like the Today, not the Today Show, but like the Colbert Report, things like that. It's supposed to be funny, and there's nothing wrong with that, to laugh at what's going on. It helps you be a little more critical about it, but just make sure that it's not a joke before you share it and say, this is what's going on. Check your biases. Whenever you read something, say, am I leaning one way or the other? Am I trying to judge this in a way that I'm looking at both sides, or am I just one-sided? And I think if you start doing that, you'll see how your perspective changes. And then last, ask your expert, ask the librarian, ask me, ask any of your professors. Check with fact-checking sites. These will help you find fake news and find things that are unbiased. So how do you change up this echo chamber in your newsfeed? Here are some things. Here are some websites that you can visit that will help you see the opposite side of what you see on social media and help you kind of get out of your bubble. And that doesn't mean that one or the other is right, but it helps you see both sides, because that's the only way you can make an educated assessment and opinion of what's going on. One of those is Escape Your Bubble, Right, Richter, Flipfeed, and Politico. All these are great websites to visit, and they'll kind of help you see the other side. And last but not least, I don't know if you'll know this, but you as students have access or discounted fees to these newspapers if you want to have access to them. They do somewhat lean one way or the other, but it gives you access to read more of the information, to see other sides. That's the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. I think the Times, if you're on campus, is free. The Wall Street Journal is free if you sign in with your school email and different things. So check into those. So, not sure if it's actual fake news or just an opinion I disagree with. Remember that when you go through and you think about the news you're seeing in your social media feed, what you're listening to on TV and in your podcast, and just go through these things and check your biases, check your sources, and let's combat fake news as a whole. Okay, guys?